Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and respected leader from the social sector from Dallas, Texas, USA, Sejal Desai. Sejal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Sejal is the executive director of the Akanksha Education Fund. So, Sejal, before we talk about the Akanksha Education Fund, a few questions for you. You've had a remarkable career spanning accounting, consulting, venture capital, M&A, and nonprofits. What prompted your transition from the corporate world into the social sector?
Great question, and it's one I get asked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I often say that my career journey has been an ongoing quest to reinvent myself, to put myself in unpredictable and uncomfortable situations every
Mm-hmm.
few years, and also to bring into my fold a new set of people from different walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's been, I would say, less about titles and money and much more about meaning.
Correct.
And so, after almost 20 years in the for profit world, in careers, like you said, spanning accounting, finance, venture capital, entrepreneurship, and M&A, I realized that while I had a great run, I wanted to spend my time doing things that were more impactful for the broader community. And
Mm-hmm.
so, about 15 years ago, I made the transition into the social sector. And, one thing I'd keenly observed over the many years was that when I volunteered, I felt a deep sense of joy and alignment that I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't experienced before, right? And so I realized around the time I was turning 40, which was 15 years ago, that I didn't want to wait till after retirement to do
Mm-hmm.
impactful work, right? And so that I like to call my midlife clarity moment. And the purpose doesn't always announce itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it
Correct.
whispers through the things that move our heart and give us joy. And so I made the conscious choice to move into the social sector, and I do believe, however, that you know. Moving into the nonprofit world wasn't a step away from business, but it was a step towards meaning, a conscious step
Mm-hmm.
towards meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to bring everything I'd learned, whether it was strategy or business development or scaling impact, into the social sector, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't as much about leaving business as it was about bringing business acumen to purpose-driven work, if that
What a
makes
great
sense.
response. Thank you.
Yeah.
Having lived and worked in India and the US, how have these two cultures shaped your approach to leadership and service?
I've always considered myself a blend of the two countries and value systems. I like to think that India gave me roots, resilience, a strong sense of family and community, a moral compass, and actually a very true, and deep understanding that um, the value of education, right, as a ladder to opportunity.
Mm.
The US, on the other hand, gave me wings, right? Systems
Yeah.
thinking, innovation, the ability to take risks, and most importantly, I would say, the confidence to challenge the status quo. And
Mm.
so now, I always think about my work and my leadership, that it sits at the intersection of both of these, right? It's heart led, it's collaborative, yet it's entrepreneurial and accountable in some sense. And so bridging these two worlds has honestly taught me that it's not about control, but it's about connection.
Mm. Amazing. And as you look back at your 30-year journey, were there any defining moments that influenced the leader and change maker you are today?
Mm. Um, early in my career, so when I moved from India to the US, this was in 1997.
Mm.
Prior to that, I mean, I'm a chartered accountant from India. I'd worked for 7 years before that with my most latest stint was at Ernst and Young,
Mm.
doing, very interesting work. We were bringing in a lot of foreign inward investment into India. And so, I'd had some very good experience. But when I moved to the
Right.
US, a lot of that, my education, my work, was in some sense invalidated, right? This was in the 90s, so there wasn't as much recognition for what a chartered accountant was, and some of this work I had done in India, and so I almost needed to start over. And while that was difficult, it did help me to learn how to start over and how to navigate through uncertainty.
Yeah.
And subsequently, I think I found myself in situations where I was starting and restarting and scaling ventures, and it taught me how to build from ground zero, and not to fear the unknown or be uncomfortable in new settings. And this ended up becoming invaluable for me, right? Because I continuously found myself,
Yeah.
reinventing year over year. But what was, in my initial career, a very uncomfortable situation for me, ended up becoming, in a way, this incredible tool in my toolbox that I now,
Well
take
said.
out regularly. Yeah,
Well
yeah,
said. Well said. Let's
yeah.
not talk
And a
about
couple.
the. Sorry, go
Mhm.
ahead. Go ahead, please.
No, no, no. I was just going to say, and two other things I think that
Yeah.
that come to mind.
Mm,
One was, and I think I mentioned this earlier, that my volunteer experiences, right, that gave me joy,
mm,
both in India and the US,
mm,
also made me realize that when I was volunteering or when I was engaged in the community,
mm.
I was really meeting good people, and it
Right.
helped me understand the importance of building community and of giving back where I lived and where I worked,
Mm,
and also just having the opportunity to mentor students from low income backgrounds. It really helped me understand that how one relationship can shift a life's trajectory for somebody. So that was sort of, I would say, another transformative piece in my life, the understanding of the importance of community and community
mm,
engagement, and
mm.
and the importance of how one person can make a difference in the life of an
Yeah.
individual. And I think the third thing would be, personally, right? As a mother, as a daughter, as a distant caregiver, I had my grandmother lived to 111. She's
Wow.
right there in the back here.
Mm,
And watching her zest for life really shaped how I saw the importance of purpose
mm.
and just longevity, right? So I'd say probably these three things, in a way, uh, at every phase in my life, right? It
Correct.
added kind of a new lens of whether it was
Absolutely.
resilience, compassion, clarity, and taught me how to navigate
Very
the world.
interesting. Well said. Sejal, let's now talk about the Akanksha Education Fund. Tell me about the mission of AEF and how it creates pathways out of poverty through education.
Yeah, so fundamentally, right? We all believe that education isn't just about academics.
Yeah.
It's about agency and it's about aspiration.
Mhm.
It's about economic mobility, increasingly so, right? And so our vision is to equip students with the knowledge, skills, resources they need to achieve economic mobility and lead purposeful, empowered lives.
Mm,
And our mission, is to truly empower students from underserved communities to unlock their full potential by providing access to not only transformative school experiences but also effective school to work transitions, right?
mm,
And through this we strive to create pathways out of generational poverty. So
mm,
so the work we do, the how behind it is, we run a network of 27 public private partnership schools in 3 cities,
mm.
and we develop a 20-year partnership with students and their parents, right? And so fundamentally, I guess the way I like to think about it is that we don't just help our children go to school; we help them go places,
Very
and that's sort of the driving force
Yeah,
behind everything
yeah,
we do.
yeah,
If that makes sense,
yeah.
yeah.
And how do you define transformative and innovative education in the context of the communities you serve?
Yeah, and that's it's a loaded question, I guess. But I would say, for us, a transformative education means that a child not only learns to read and write, but learns to dream and lead as well, right? And innovation isn't only about technology alone, right? Technology is important, but it's
Mm,
really reimagining what's possible, right? When you put equity, empathy, and excellence together. It's about project-based learning. It's about problem solving, not just rote learning. If you walk into an Akanksha classroom, and I highly recommend you do if you're in Bombay, Pune, or Nagpur anytime, our classrooms are really nurturing curiosity and creativity and confidence and critical thinking. And the skills, and all of these skills, right, as you might attest as well, is that they help children break cycles of poverty and in a way become change makers themselves, right? And so really, I mean, that's the work we're doing. Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And you mentioned that you do a 20-year collaboration. What is the long-term impact that you have seen on the alumni of Akanksha through their careers or in the communities that they live in?
Yeah, so now that we've been around for over 35 years, we've had the opportunity to see some of our children that early on were part of our centers, and now for the last since 2007 2008 in our schools, right? And so we've had students graduate from our programs. Our alumni are now pursuing careers in engineering or education, hospitality, finance. Many of them are giving back. They're mentoring our own students, working in nonprofits. Our students are earning on average twice the national average of income for children, for students in that age group, right? Or for individuals in that age group. And some of our earliest students are actually also teachers at Akanksha, which is wonderful to see, right? Because, the way I like to think about it is that the true test of success is when the people you've served are now serving are the ones that are now serving, right? In some sense. And so I guess the biggest shifts, right, we've seen is that a lot of our parents, they were going through, I guess, generational poverty, right, or experienced generational poverty. Most of them were in daily wage earning, jobs, if you will, and now our students are, many of them, right, are in white collar jobs and are, working in offices with steadier incomes on pathways very different from those of their parents. Some of them are also seeing geographic mobility. It takes time in the big cities, but they are seeing geographic mobility, and so. And also the mindset shifts we've seen, right? Not only in the students, but also in the parents and the families and the communities within which we serve. Those are very important success indicators for us.
Very well said. And tell me, how has technology shaped Akanksha's approach, especially in the post-pandemic world?
So, Ashutosh, as you might imagine, right, the pandemic accelerated digital learning, and of course also revealed some very deep inequities, in learning, right, and across the board, right, for students from underserved communities versus not. So, at that time, we responded by obviously bringing in devices, training our teachers, in blended learning and in ensuring that students had access to these devices, right? Because that's not commonplace. Our kids are growing up in very small, one room homes, where if there was a device, it might have been a parent's device. There's no access to Wi-Fi. So there was a lot that we had to overcome during the pandemic. But post-pandemic, right, when everybody went back into schools and into the classrooms, what we started to do was really say, think about how technology can help personalize learning, right? In classrooms as well. So, be an aid to the teacher, but also the students. So it's been a wonderful added aspect to it. We've also, used technology to connect alumni to mentors and other opportunities, right? But I would also say that, while technology is supporting the work we do as an important part of the work we do, we continue to believe, right, that we and continue to be grounded in relationships, because do believe that no app can replace the deep impact of a caring adult in the life of a child, right? And
Mm,
I think that still remains at the center of the work we do. So while technology enables access, it's really empathy that enables learning, if that makes
mm.
sense. And so technology remains an enabler,
Yeah.
but the work that our teachers and our school leaders and our social workers and counselors do with our kids are not replaceable in any way.
Amazing. You also spoken about the importance of partnerships with families.
Mhm.
Why is family involvement so important and critical in your model?
It is. It's and we've been lucky to have been sort of awarded and recognized for our work with community
Yeah.
engagement.
Mhm.
We truly believe, right, that parents are a child's first and lifelong teacher, right?
Correct.
So when
Correct.
families are engaged, attendance rises, confidence grows, communities actually, also get to transform, right? Our teachers will regularly visit homes, our
Mm,
social workers know every student and every family, almost inside out. We host family circles. We co-create learning goals
mm,
with the parents. Our parents are invited into our schools every week, and they also serve on school management committees. So they have leadership opportunities. They have ownership, right?
yeah.
They're vested in their child's education. They
Mm,
understand, and more importantly, because our schools are in English, right, and our students are now learning, thinking at a very different level than
yeah.
what their parents might have been. We also wanted to maintain the respect that a child should have for their parent, right? Even
Mm,
if they are not,
English
able to
speak. Yeah.
speak and otherwise, right? And so, what we've consciously done is ensure that our parents understand what their kids are learning and know how to communicate about what the kids are learning with the students, right? and
Mm,
and I think that has help in multiple ways, right? Where again, students are seeing that their parents are coming into schools, that they are partners in the education, that they are involved in this process, and parents also, feel that sense of ownership, right, of an
mm,
Akanksha school, and so that just leads to a wonderful partnership, and many of our parents, are now actually also they're working within our schools. Some of them have decided to go back and study themselves, right?
mhm.
Because and so these are just empowering
Yeah.
things that happen, right, when you engage families and communities. And so I think you know when families are learning alongside our children, right, the whole community moves forward, and so that's one of the main and important
Mm,
reasons why
mm, mm.
we believe it's important to
Absolutely.
engage
Well said.
parents and
And
communities. Yeah.
do you face any kind of challenges or any issues with government regulations or any other infrastructural gaps? And if so, how do you handle some of these?
Yeah, so we're actually a public, we run public-private partnership schools, right? And so the way our model works is that the municipal corporations in the cities that we work in, Mumbai, Pune, and Nagpur, they actually provide us the school infrastructure, midday meals, and school supplies. And we go in with the school leader, teachers, curriculum, social workers, just all the wraparound work, right? That goes into educating a child and developing these partnerships, right? So in a sense, the government and Akanksha, right, are our partners in the process. In
Hmm.
many cases, our schools are now also being funded, partly funded, I would say, by the government as well, right? And so the government to that end, is a strategic partner in the work we do, and in many cases, right, like the PCMC, which is the Pimpri Chinchwad Municipal School District, we saw some incredible. I mean, the partnership was taken to an incredible level where while we're running 10 schools in Pune
Hmm.
in the Pune area, they wanted us to share our best practices with other government schools that we
Hmm.
were not running ourselves, right? So we started to work with in both Pune as well as in Nagpur with a total of 200 other schools,
Hmm.
sharing our best practices through a program called Project Setu. So we're now impacting indirectly 80,000 students, another 1,000 educators,
Hmm.
and it shows to the government's partnership in terms of how uh, they want to see a shift in the quality of government school education, and working with Akanksha to be a partner in making that happen. We saw again mindset shifts not only in classrooms, in schools, but also in more families wanting to send their students to, or their children to, government schools, right? Because of the impact that was happening. And we also saw that because of some of this work we were doing, the government was making more investments in programs like art, in libraries, things that otherwise government schools don't have, are not well resourced for.
Correct.
And so to that end, I think, government is a great partner for us as
Absolutely.
well, right? I mean, obviously we have to,
Yeah.
because it's a public-private partnership model, we have to work together and within the confines of what a government school, it looks like, etc. But otherwise, it's a wonderful partnership, and we
Fascinating.
hope to see more public-private partnership models across the
Fascinating.
country going
Fascinating.
forward. Yeah,
And
yeah.
tell me, what role does the Akanksha Education Fund play in connecting the Indian diaspora with the cause of education in India?
Yeah, yeah. And so, in the same way as I sort of talked about me personally being, a catalyst or a bridge, right, between two countries, right? I think
Mm.
the role Akanksha Education Fund also has, right, is to play that powerful bridge, right, of resources, of ideas, of heart, through our donors, through our volunteers, through our partners, both corporate as well as education partners, right? In the US, we have the ability to invest in India's future, right? To support proven high impact education models, and quite honestly, I think there's an opportunity for India to share with the world as well, right? And
Right.
so we think of ourselves as sort of sitting in the middle, right, connecting these two disparate dots. There's a diaspora here
Yeah.
that wants to give back to India and needs to find ways to do that through meaningful models, and so Akanksha plays that role, as do many other India-focused NGOs, in fact, and we're also involved with something called the India Philanthropy Alliance
Yeah.
here in the US, which is a network of various India-focused NGOs, and collectively, individually as well as collectively, right? We are that bridge between the diaspora as well as Indian NGOs, right? Raising awareness of the work that all of us are doing in multiple different sectors, and creating transparency for individuals that want to deeply connect, right? And
Well
so,
said.
and so I think, in a way, philanthropy sort of is our way of staying rooted, right? And in a way, the gratitude that many of us in the diaspora hold here, how do we turn that into action, right? How do
Well
we
said.
turn that into ways of giving back to India?
Well said. I have time for two more questions, Sejal. How does Akanksha create safe and inclusive spaces for girls in its schools?
It's a great question. So I will I'll back up a little bit and let you know kind of what an Akanksha school looks like, right? So our schools, consciously, we have maintained a 50-50 boy-girl ratio within our schools. It's a design choice. We believe that girls and boys, right, both need to be educated, and
Absolutely.
especially our the boys in India, more so, right? For girls to succeed, it's
Correct.
important to make sure that boys do as well, right? And
Yeah.
so our schools are free for boys and girls to attend. Students get admitted through a lottery system, but we like to maintain a 50-50 boy-girl ratio. At the same time, right, our we ensure that every girl, feels seen, heard, supported, not only by the teachers and the community, right, but also to some extent by the boys, right? So from inclusive curricula to mentorship, right, girls are building confidence and agency as well, right? So they have all the leadership opportunities, sports opportunities, arts, um, you know, um, and just learning opportunities that anybody would have, right? So, and quite honestly, many of our schools have very strong female role models, right? And the teachers and the school leaders, and who can all show what's possible, right?
Correct.
And also many girls who've actually, gone on and taken on interesting careers, right? Like, they, have the opportunity to inspire other students, right?
Yeah.
So when other girls can see what is possible, right, it makes it more achievable, right, if you will. And
Very
so
well said.
and
Very
I think,
crisp.
to your point, right, if a girl feels safe to speak up, right,
Absolutely.
she knows
Absolutely.
how to show up in the world, right?
Correct.
And so I think, I think, that's an important part of what we do. But like I said, I think we truly believe that boys and girls both need to be educated, in our country, and so we take that
Amazing.
approach to our school.
Amazing. Amazing. And my last question for you, Sejal, given the amazing work that you are doing through Akanksha with so many schools in our country, if you had one message for global leaders about why education is the most powerful tool against poverty, what would it be?
Yeah, and so I mean, this is not going to come as a surprise, right? Because many of us are actually products of a good education
Correct.
and opportunity, right? And so so I think I would just say education changes everything, right? It's a great equalizer.
Mm,
It has the potential to break intergenerational poverty, to unlock potential and to build mindsets that can,
mm.
where change becomes possible,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, there's a Nelson Mandela quote, right, that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world.
Mm,
I'd also say it's probably one of the most human weapons, right, that one can use, right? And so, I mean, truly, when you educate a child, you are not just changing their life, you are changing the future of their
correct.
family, their
Correct.
community, and the country as a whole, right? And
Mm,
so, if there is an investment worthy of making, I think a lot of the world's problems, can absolutely be solved with a good education and,
mm.
for all, right? And I don't just mean that in the form of having a certificate that can potentially
Yeah.
get you or not get you a job, right? It's really what it does for the ability for people to think, the ability that it allows you to to do problem solving, to navigate through the world, to critically think, to be compassionate, and all of that, right? And so, yeah.
Very interesting. And on that note, Sejal, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been. I mean, thank you for talking to me about your incredible journey and how you transitioned from such a high-powered corporate career to giving back and making an impact in India. Thank you for speaking to me about Akanksha, your fund, and the amazing work that you're doing for the 27 schools and the children who are studying in these schools. Thank you again for everything that you and Akanksha are doing for all these children in Indian schools. Thank you again and good
Th-
luck.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh, for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you and sharing my journey.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.